Welcome into 5 Wide Fantasy. Today's video, running back rankings for the first week of the fantasy playoffs in week 15 of the season. If you guys are new to the channel, be sure to drop a like, subscribe to the video if you enjoyed. As well, we're going to be ranking the top 30 at the position and helping you make start-sit decisions in all of these matchups. This video might go a little bit long today because I do want to make sure I'm thorough, in-depth with some of these decisions on my rankings. It's a big week. Some of you guys, this is make or break for everybody in their season. Got to win this matchup. So we'll go through the top 30 and some players that I have that missed out on the rankings. But before we get to it, Betfred. If you guys haven't signed up at Betfred, if you sign up, bet $50. They're going to give you $250 in free bets. Thursday Night Football, tomorrow night. There's a couple plays I really like in this game. The first is Geno Smith, over 249.5 passing yards. He's gone over this number in 5 straight games. Status of Kenneth Walker is up in the air. I don't expect him to play, but maybe he pulls something out because he jammed his ankle. I don't know what that means. There's no injury timeline for jamming your ankle, so maybe he could be back. But regardless, the San Francisco 49ers are the best run defense in the NFL. This team is going to rely on the pass quite a bit here, so I like Geno to go over his passing yards. I also kind of like the Seahawks, man. I think the 49ers are being overvalued a fair bit. I think the Bucs are a terrible team, and the Seahawks are a much better team than the Bucs, even though they did lose to them earlier this year. I know the Seahawks are trending in the wrong direction, but they're getting 3 points at home here. And playing in Seattle, it's a very tough place to play. I think Seattle can move the ball through the air, like I mentioned. The question will be, can they shore things up defensively to make stops against the run? That'll be the big question here. No Deebo Samuel now for the 49ers. That's one less option they're rid of. Another potential one to look at as well, if you're betting on this game, is George Kittle's receiving yards. The Seahawks are terrible against fantasy tight ends. In fantasy against tight ends, I think they're giving up over 50 yards, maybe 60 yards. 60 yards, I think, per game to the position. So potentially a good look for Kittle with Deebo out as well. So a couple bets I love in that game. Get down on it at Betfred. If you sign up, that link is down below in the description. Okay, start with the top 6. My number 1 back on the week is Derrick Henry going against the Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers had a great week against the run against the Dolphins. I don't expect that to continue. This is still a unit that's very depleted and down to fifth, 6th string options at D tackle, at the D tackle spots. So I expect Henry to have another big week here. The Chargers are 28th in fantasy points allowed, 30th in run defense grade. No problem here for Henry being the number 1 option. At 2, Christian McCaffrey. I mentioned those Seahawks and their struggles against the run. McCaffrey now, with Deebo Samuel out, is probably set up to take an even bigger rushing workload moving forward for the next few weeks as Deebo is out, likely for the rest of the fantasy season. The Seahawks now 31st in fantasy points allowed to running backs and 26th in rushing DVOA. A good matchup here for McCaffrey. At 3, Austin Eckler. This is a very tough matchup. The Titans are 2nd in fantasy points allowed, 1st in rushing DVOA. But here's the thing. Austin Eckler never runs the ball well. He hasn't run the ball well in over a month, maybe even longer than that I can remember. But he still gets it done because of his receiving floor that Joe Lombardi just loves to check it down to him. So the Titans are giving up over 6 receptions per game to the position. Certainly going to elevate him. I'd expect him to see 17, 18 touches in this game and the potential, of course, to always find the end zone as he's done all season long. So I'm still high on him. At 4, Dalvin Cook. This might be the highest I've had Cook in my rankings all season. I do like the matchup quite a bit against the Colts. The Colts are 25th in fantasy points allowed to running backs and 15th in rushing DVOA. Big thing here for Cook is the Colts have had a really rough year, and I expect the Vikings to win this game and handle things on the road, handle things at home as sizable favorites. So I like them to give Cook the ball at a good volume and potentially find the end zone as well. At 5, Josh Jacobs. This is a tough matchup. The Patriots, 3rd in fantasy points allowed, 12th in run defense grade. It's a good Patriots run defense. We saw James Conner, find ways to be efficient and score against the Patriots. I expect the Raiders to be in this game and potentially win this game. So Jacobs, Josh McDaniels is giving him the ball to the team's detriment. I think that's why they lost last week, is because they couldn't stop handing the ball to Josh Jacobs for 2.5 yards, 3 yards a carry. So expect his volume to be high. And this is a better matchup than it was last week. So you can expect him to be even better than he was last week. At 6, Alvin Kamara. A lot of you might have a problem with the fact I'm this high on Alvin Kamara because he's been killing you lately. But Mark Ingram is now out for the season. David Johnson was elevated from the practice squad. Yes, David Johnson is still a professional football player right now. Same goes for T.Y. Hilton. That was a surprising add. I didn't think he was interested in playing football anymore, T.Y. Hilton. But Kamara going against this Falcons defense, the 23rd in fantasy points allowed, 28th in rushing DVOA. You could run the ball on this team. Kamara, I think, is in for a big week. I really like Kamara this week. Definitely want to start him. I think without Mark Ingram, that leaves some more carries available for Kamara and less of a split here, so could be helpful for him. At 7, flipping things over to the rest of the top 12, Miles Sanders. Sanders coming off a great week. He was one of my favorite plays. We cashed his prop last week. He found the end zone a couple times. Going against Chicago, 29th in fantasy points allowed, 29th in rushing DVOA. This guy's a must start. There's some players here that I have him over that I'm very comfortable with because it's a plus matchup for them in terms of running the football. I think they'll dominate against this Bears team and be able to find a lot of success on the ground and some high volume on the ground. So I love Sanders this week. At 8, been ranking this guy high each and every week, and it's been killing me. Travis Etienne. He has not been efficient on the ground. Last week, I wasn't very high on him, actually, because of the Titans' defense and how good they are against the run. Dallas has been good from a fantasy perspective. Like, they're 5th in fantasy points allowed to running backs, but they're 21st in run defense grade, and they allow over 100 yards rushing per game to running backs, which I believe is bottom 8 in the NFL. So I think Etienne can still find some efficiency on the ground, and I think the Jags will struggle with the pass, so I do expect them to lean on Etienne in this game a fair bit. That's why I'm so high on him. At 9, James Conner going against the Denver Broncos, a game here with Colt McCoy at quarterback. We could see some high volume here for Conner as a receiver as well, which has really improved over the last number of weeks. And Denver is a team where you do want to run the ball against them. They're very good against the pass, not as good against the run. 13th in fantasy points allowed, 17th in rushing DVOA, and they're allowing over 100 yards per game to fantasy running backs. So I do like Conner because he has that all-encompassing role now. There's nobody like we saw early in the season with Benjamin spelling him. That's not happening. It's the James Conner show in Arizona, and that'll continue with Kyler Murray now out for the season. 10, Tony Pollard against those same Jaguars we talked about earlier. The Jags, 19th in fantasy points allowed, 15th in run defense grade. They're pretty mediocre. They're decent run defense. We saw Henry have a huge first half against them. Then they really shored things up defensively in the second half. Big thing is they're tackling. Like, they can allow explosive plays, and Pollard's been hitting a ton of those lately. So still high on him. Again, it's hard to be like giving Pollard, like last week I had him like top 6, I believe. I can't do that again. Just with the split these two have, it's hard to really find him in that like top 5 back in terms of projection just because his opportunities are split. 11, Nick Chubb. I'm really worried about Nick Chubb this week. Baltimore has been elite defensively, and when they run into a game here where they've got their quarterback situation very much up in the air, they're going to run the ball a ton on their own side and try to turn this game into one that has very few plays because they're looking to keep this game as tight as they can. And that is a problem for Nick Chubb. This Ravens defense is 4th in fantasy points allowed, 7th in rushing DVOA. Like, this is a very tough matchup for Chubb. He's still the focal point of this offense. Deshaun Watson hasn't found himself to that player he was in years past. So we could see, I do think Watson will be leaned on a fair bit more in this game. So I do have some concern for Chubb, but I still see him being able to give you a good enough floor that you do have to play him. Like, you're not going to sit Nick Chubb unless I've got some guys here that you feel give you better upside. Chubb's upside, I think, is a little bit capped this week. At 12, Jonathan Taylor against Minnesota. Minnesota's a tough run defense. 18th in fantasy points allowed, so would tell you they're like below average, but 2nd in run defense grade. I think they're a tough team to run the ball on, but again, Indianapolis right now, their pass protection is atrocious. They don't feel comfortable throwing the football. They want to lean on the ground. I expect them to do that regardless of how efficient Taylor is. Expect plenty of volume for Taylor this week against Minnesota. 13, Isaiah Pacheco. I think it's the highest I've been on Isaiah Pacheco all season, and for good reason. Houston, dead last in fantasy points allowed to running backs, 31st in run defense grade. This is a team that has been atrocious against the run, and everybody's running the ball against them because they're significant favorites. We've got the Chiefs as like almost 14-point favorites against Houston in this game. Pacheco is going to see a ton of volume, a ton. I would expect 20. I would see anywhere between 20 to 22 carries for Pacheco in this game because of how positive this game script is likely to be for Kansas City. I don't expect Houston, after an absolute dogfight last week against the Cowboys and a heartbreaking loss, game that was in their hands late, to be able to bounce back in a big way here against Kansas City and being competitive yet again. That's going to be a problem for them. 14, Najee Harris against Carolina. Carolina, 21st in fantasy points allowed to running backs, 19th in rushing DVOA. This is a Carolina team that I really like their secondary. And with Mitch Trubisky at quarterback, I think the Steelers are going to run the ball quite a bit in this game. Trubisky was atrocious last week. He cost them the game single-handedly. He turned the ball over 3 times in opponent territory. So look for Harris to have good volume here, good potential to find the end zone because of that as well. It's going to be a low-scoring game, I expect, but Najee will be the focal point of this Steelers offense, so I do want to start him this week. 15, Saquon Barkley. You've been wondering where he is. I have him pretty low this week. He's been struggling immensely. He's been killing your fantasy team. And Washington is a really good run defense, elite run defense. We talked about it in the playoff strategy. 6th in fantasy points allowed, 4th in rushing DVOA. Really good run defense. Again, he is the identity of their offense. He's going to see volume. He's going to have the elevated floor because of that. But I'm a little concerned. This is a tough matchup. Like, Saquon Barkley is just... I'm hoping you're still in the fantasy playoffs if you have Saquon Barkley, because ever since the first 4 weeks of the season, he has not been very good for you. 16, Ezekiel Elliott. Wondering where Elliott is and how far he is apart from Pollard. 6 spots here. The Jags. We talked about this matchup. I think Zeke and Pollard will still have good volume here. This team is a significant favorite in this game. Well, not significant, but favorites in this game. So I do expect the run game to be a focal point from this team. 17, Brian Robinson. Robinson has a matchup with the Giants, like we talked about with Saquon. But on the other side, this is a plus matchup for their running game. We saw Robinson have a good game against New York a few weeks ago. The Giants, 26th in fantasy points allowed, 31st in rushing DVOA. A good matchup for the Commanders' ground game. With Ron Rivera at head coach, I find this team loves to put it on the ground with Robinson. That gives Robinson a really good chance to find the end zone here in this one. So that's why I'm pretty high on him. Even though I don't really love his talent and ability, this team loves to get him the ball. 18, Joe Mixon. Relatively low on Mixon. Mixon saw, in terms of this season, one of his lowest splits in snaps because Samaje Perine was really good in his absence. That's not going to change the fact that Mixon's still the number 1 back for this team, but this is a tough matchup. Like, the Bucs are a pretty good run defense, 9th in fantasy points allowed, 12th in rushing DVOA. I think the success this team will have is through the air because the Bucs cannot create any pressure against the pass. So that's going to make life really easy for their pass game. So I'm a little worried about Mixon, but I do expect Mixon to still see some good volume because of the fact the Bengals are 3.5-point favorites here. I expect them to win this game. That leads to Zach Taylor handing the ball off to Mixon a fair bit here. 19, Zonovan Knight. We saw Michael Carter come back, and it didn't have much of any impact on Zonovan Knight. I thought it would, didn't at all. So I'm pretty high on Zonovan Knight against the Lions defense. 15th in fantasy points allowed, 22nd in rushing DVOA. The Jets in this game, it's like a pick 'em. This game's like bouncing between the number of 1-point favor for either side. So I do expect Knight to see some pretty good volume here. This Jets team, playing indoors, they've been liking the pass game quite a bit, but they've been involving Knight as their primary rusher and even getting him involved as a receiver. So in a game where this team could be leading, which they haven't for a couple weeks here, I do like Knight. 20, Aaron Jones. A free fall for Aaron Jones in my rankings. Still think you can play him, but the Rams, very good run defense. 8th in fantasy points allowed, 1st in run defense grade. It's going to be a tough matchup for Aaron Jones. So if you're in those 10-team leagues, there's a chance that I've already given you a couple running backs you should start over him, and likely at the flex spot. If you're in a PPR league, there are wide receivers I'd rather play than Aaron Jones, but he's still, focal point of the offense. Their pass game has been really up and down. I just expect him to do more as a receiver in this game as opposed to a running back. So A.J. Dillon's way off my list here. He's not someone I'm ever considering playing in this matchup. So Jones, I'm pretty low on this week, but as the number 1 back for a Green Bay offense that should be leading in this game and should win this game, there's the chance for him to find the end zone, of course. 21, D'Onta Foreman. Foreman going against the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. The Steelers, 20th in fantasy points allowed, 11th in rushing DVOA. The Panthers are running the ball a ton right now, a ton. It's through D'Onta Foreman. It's through Chuba Hubbard. We're seeing a bit of Raheem Blackshear, but Foreman is the lead back. He saw over 20 carries last week. He just was the one that happened to not find the end zone. Blackshear broke like a 15-yard run to find a score. Hubbard came in. Foreman got an inside the 5 touch, didn't get in, and then Chuba Hubbard got the next touch and found the end zone. So unfortunate for him, but I still think he's the number 1 guy you want to play in a pretty decent to middling matchup. Like They're favorites in this game, so the potential of that rushing volume to continue is there. 22, Gus Edwards. I know a lot of you would be wondering between him and J.K. Dobbins in a really good matchup against Cleveland, who are 30th in fantasy points allowed, 30th in rushing DVOA, and the Ravens being without potentially both quarterbacks. I haven't really seen what the deal is on Huntley yet for this week, but that leads to probably a ton of rushing volume for this team. So why aren't I higher on them? They're both here like right around my top 24, top 25 on the week. My problem is like I watched J.K. Dobbins play and like I wish him the best in his career, and I hope he puts together a good week for you. But I watched that breakaway run, and his legs barely lifted off the ground. Like this guy is nowhere near 100%. So I like Edwards better because I think he's closer to 100%, and their volume was pretty close. I believe 15 for Dobbins and 13 for Edwards. So I lean more towards Edwards in the plus matchup, but I think both are very playable assets. 23, Antonio Gibson. Gibson, we mentioned with the Giants matchup. Gibson's still earning volume as a rusher, playing as that primary receiving back as well. I think this is still a good matchup for both backs. I think they'll see plenty of volume in this game. So I still think Gibson is a good playable asset. And still he's a better player, so he has the better chance in my mind to break a big play and find the end zone on like a 40-yard run potential. Wrapping up the top 24, Raheem Mostert. This is on for me, the assumption that Jeff Wilson will be absent. If Wilson is playing, I would back up Raheem Mostert to like RB28 territory, I would say, just because of the fact that I would expect these guys to split still, and then this is a tough matchup against the Bills defense, who are 10th in fantasy points allowed, 25th in run defense grade, but their DVOA is much higher. So I do think this is a tough matchup for their ground game, and we saw them in the previous matchup, find success through the air, and that's probably where they're going to find it here. But the one thing is, and we talked about this in the fantasy strategy video, the playoff strategy video, is weather. The weather doesn't look great here in Miami, Miami and Buffalo. So that could lead to some more ground game because there is some decently high winds in the forecast. So if that maintains itself, when we run the live stream on Saturday morning on the Twitch channel, I could kind of move him up in my rankings, but this is where I have him right now. All right, final 6 here to round out the top 30. J.K. Dobbins, who I mentioned at 25. Dobbins, I still see as someone they're going to give the ball to quite a bit. He's definitely in favor of John Harbaugh as the number one guy, but I'm a little bit concerned about where that knee is at for him, where his health is, to be able to be really efficient in this plus matchup. So with it being a split, that's why I'm like a little bit tempered in terms of expectation of like plus matchup. Oh my God, I got to play J.K. Dobbins. This team's going to run the ball so much. His efficiency might be a problem for me. 26, Latavius Murray, definitely still a playable asset here for the Broncos. With Russell Wilson's status up in the air, I'm not sure if he's going to play or not. If he doesn't play, that might elevate Murray a few more spots for me, because with Brett Rippon at QB against this Arizona defense that's going to also offensively have no Kyler Murray, you could see some higher rushing volume for Murray. And then we saw Mike Boone get hurt. It might be out, but Marlon Mack is probably going to be that RB2 for them. The Cardinals, 22nd in fantasy points allowed, 28th in run defense grade, so a plus matchup for the ground game for the Denver Broncos. And if Russell Wilson is out, then that could lead to more rushing volume, like I mentioned. 27, Rachaad White. We saw White out-snap Leonard Fournette last week, but this Tampa Bay rushing game is atrocious, and we saw Cincinnati with DJ Reader in the fold has really, really been good against the run. If you look at those matchups against the Titans and last week against the Browns, they limited Derrick Henry and Nick Chubb to just 72 rushing yards on 31 carries. This team's been really good lately stopping the run, so I'm very concerned for their ground game. But I do expect what elevates these two guys, and Rachaad White especially, is the receiving game. Like, this is a team that has to check the ball down a ton because they just haven't been able to get good protection from the offensive line. So White gets 6-7 receptions in this game. That elevates him to being in this like flex tier for me. 28, Pierre Strong Jr. This is obviously a matchup against the Raiders that's very enticing. The Raiders 24th in fantasy points allowed, 18th in rushing DVOA. Strong looked to be the better back last week. He was out-snapped by Kevin Harris, so that leads me to think that both of these guys are going to be playing involved and split together. How much they lean on the ground game is up in the air, but I don't think Damian Harris and Ramondre Stevenson are going to play in this game, so that's why I have Strong but at this higher, this ranking that's out at 28. So I still like Strong. Definitely someone you can play, especially in your deeper leagues. but with the split, it leaves some question marks into how much volume he really gets. 29, Jerick McKinnon. Mentioned how plus this matchup is for the Chiefs ground game. McKinnon isn't that primary runner, though, for this team. It's by Isaiah Pacheco, but McKinnon will still be involved. Like, this Chiefs team isn't afraid to, milk that lead by still going to the air, checking the ball down to McKinnon. McKinnon will be involved a little bit on the ground, so that still leaves a plus matchup for him and this Chiefs team on the ground as well. All right, that's the top 30, some guys that are missed. I got David Montgomery out of my rankings. The Eagles are really improving in their run defense with Jordan Davis back, so I am a little bit concerned, especially now with Fields being so run-heavy as the quarterback spot. It's taken away from Montgomery. If we're looking at the Lions running backs, I don't want to play any of them against this Jets defense. We're seeing far too much of a split between Swift, Williams, and Jackson. I'm concerned. I think this game is going to be low scoring. I don't want to play any of the Lions running backs. But if I have to, DeAndre Swift is my RB 31 in this game. So that's where I've got for the Lions running backs. Cam Akers is a serviceable flex option. Like, if you're in a standard league with no points per reception, Akers would be a decent play. The Packers are a bad run defense. The Rams, obviously, with Baker Mayfield now a quarterback, with their lack of passing weapons, are definitely going to run the ball a decent amount, but I'm definitely a little bit concerned. The Falcons. Saints run defense is really good. I have Cordell Patterson by RB 36 this week. He's splitting work with Tyler Algier. Desmond Ridder enters the fold. How does that impact the rushing game? Too many question marks for me to be able to take a gamble on that. And then, like I mentioned, A.J. Dillon, nowhere near my top 30 this week. And Dara Gumbawale is my RB 35. Again, a lot of questions for me between splitting with Rex Burkhead. This team is going to be a massive underdog, and I think this time they're not able to keep it as tight. So that might lead to Gumbawale's value being entirely as a receiving back, and Burkhead can do that as well. So that's where I'm at there. And then Singletary. I should mention Singletary. He's my RB 33 on the week. We're seeing the split with James Cook. Miami's run defense is really good. The only way I see Singletary being a good option for you is if he sees plenty of receiving volume, and we haven't really seen that the last few weeks. It was really good in the middle part of the season, but it hasn't been like that lately. So I'm concerned and would lean against playing him over, of course, all these other options I've mentioned. So that is the top 30. Those are some of the guys I have out this week, helping you with must start and sit decisions at the running back position for week 15, the first week of the fantasy playoffs. If you guys have any questions on players here at the running back position, in terms of who to start, who to sit, look at the rankings. I've got the rankings. I've listed all the rankings here. I'm not going to answer your question if you say, what running back should I start, when I just read you the rankings. If you have a running back and a receiver that you're looking to go between, happy to answer those in the comments down below. And of course, go check out our friends over at Betfred. If you sign up, deposit $50, bet $50, they're going to give you $250 in free bets. Yeah, if you haven't taken advantage of that, the fantasy season is wrapping up. The NFL playoffs are going to be here. The only thing you can do is bet on these games. I would go do that at Betfred. So go sign up at Betfred. That link is down below in the description. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.